Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Poetry 1, course code 403, lecture 32. We discussed the text of The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. The text started off, let's have a recap of the poem. The poem started off with the theme, the invocation to the muse. The poet invoked the muse of poetry to help him, to guide him to write a poem on a trivial issue, on a matter which is not very significant. But he said that if the muse of poetry helps him, and if Belinda and Carlyle, who have inspired him to write that poem as he was writing this poem on the suggestion of his friend John Carlyle, so if they approve his plan, he will be able to he will be able to complete this task. As the poem opens, we find Belinda lying in her on her bed. She is in her bedroom, and it is the time of the day. The poet has described that it is noon, so it is probably the midday. First she gets up, but she puts her head again on the pillow and she goes to sleep once again. And this time she had a dream, and there was a prophecy of danger in that dream. Further in that dream, the spirits were introduced. These spirits are known as selves. Their leader is Ariel, and it tells Belinda that these spirits are transformed into spirits. They were first human beings, and after their death, the women who keep vanities in their heart, they are transformed into different spirits. And these spirits, they keep a guard. They protect these young, beautiful ladies and girls. Then Belinda's lapdog, who is the pet dog, his name is Shock, wakes Belinda up. She gets up, and the first thing that she does after getting up, she reads a letter, and she is happy because that is invitation for a party. After that, Belinda's dressing table is described, and on that dressing table we come to know that there are all sorts of beauty aids present, cosmetics of all sorts are present, and they are made up of different expensive materials, and they are brought from all over the world. In Canto 2, the readers are taken out of Belinda's room, and Belinda is found traveling on a boat. On that boat, a number of young males and females, they are present, and they all are very happy. And Baron is one of the gentlemen who is present on that boat. He admires Belinda's beautiful lock, and Belinda is the center of attention while sitting on that boat. The atmosphere of the boat is described. It is very pleasant. Belinda seemed happy, and since Belinda seemed happy, she smiled. Everything in the world, in the surroundings, that seemed happy. Now all these people, they were carefree of the incident that had to come. Ariel and the other selves, they were worried about the incident, because Ariel was the one who had earlier prophesied that danger, their dreadful event that would come that very day. Since Ariel is the leader of the selves, so he appoints a number of selves on the guard of Belinda, and he gives them the responsibility and tells them the ones who would not do their duty wholeheartedly would be punished. They reach the Hampton Court. Belinda challenges two gentlemen, including Baron, and the game of Amber begins between the because the game of Amber requires three players. One is Belinda, the other is Baron, and there is another fine gentleman. In the game of Amber, the cards represent in caricature the characters of the poem, and we have then we had Clarissa also. After the game of Amber is over, coffee is served, and meanwhile, while taking coffee, Baron is thinking of the plan, is thinking of the strategy to to get hold of Belinda's lock of hair. Meanwhile, Clarissa appears there, and she takes out a pair of scissors from her case, and right at that time when Baron is about to cut the lock of hair, Ariel and the other cells try to Belinda make aware that there is a danger, but as Ariel comes to know about her feelings, about her true feelings that she had concealed in her heart, that she had soft corner for Baron, and Ariel withdrew. Baron cuts off, finally he cut off Belinda's hair, Belinda's lock of hair, and when the lock of hair was cut, Belinda came to know about it, and she was filled with fury. She was miserable with the grief of losing the lock of hair. Baron, he took it as a trophy, as his victory over Belinda, that he had obtained that lock of hair. Umbriel appeared there. Umbriel is a gnome who is a bad spirit, who is an evil spirit, and the journey of Umbriel takes a journey to the underworld, to the cave of spleen, to the cave of the queen. Umbriel traveled to the underworld, to the cave of Queen Spleen, and she gave him two bags that are full of sighs, grief, sorrows and sobs. So those bags Umbriel took, and when reached Belinda, he emptied those bags over Belinda, and because of the effect of these gifts that he had that Umbriel had brought for Belinda from the Queen Spleen, Belinda was overwhelming with the emotions of anger and grief. Then Thalestris, since she was also lying with Belinda at that very moment, she was filled with the anger, and she made a speech to Belinda. She said that this is a great disgrace to Belinda, that she has lost a lock of hair, that Baron would keep with her, and he would show it to others, to other gentlemen, as a reward of his love. She asks Sir Plume to ask Baron to return that lock of hair. Sir Plume makes a request to Baron, but Baron's response was very cold, and he did not want to return that lock of hair. Finally, Umbriel's second trick, because whatever had happened so far, the Thalestris speech, Belinda, and then Sir Plume, Umbriel was not happy on all this, because he was not satisfied whatever had happened, because he wanted something more than this. So he used another trick, and whatever was left in that bag, he emptied the whole bag on Belinda, and because of this, Belinda's attitude changed, and she made a speech. After Belinda's speech, she cursed their day. She said that this was the most hateful day, and it should be ever cursed. And she cursed for having been there, and she cursed the day. She said that it was better for her. She would have been 10 times happier if she had never known about the Hampton Court, or if she had never traveled in those carriages, or if she would have never, if nobody had ever appreciated her beauty. After that, we have Clarissa's address, in which we find a bit of moral also, because Clarissa, here she appeared to be a little cleverer as compared to other ladies, and she said that it is the charm that attracts sights, and merit wins the soul. So she was in the favor of wit and intelligence of females. But Clarissa's address did not affect anyone. It had no influence on anyone present there. Nobody appreciated her, whatever she had said. Nobody acted upon that. And a battle between the sexes started, because on one hand there was Baron, and on the other hand there was grievous and angry Belinda. The females, they were on the side of Belinda, and the males, they were on the side of Baron. Finally, in this battle, Belinda won, and she demanded her lock from Baron. She asked him to return her lock of hair. Meanwhile, they started looking for the lock of hair everywhere, but they could not find that lock of hair anywhere, and the poet tried to reconcile, tried to comfort Belinda by saying that that lock of hair is taken to the heavens, and it has become immortal. And her friend also said that all the things, when human beings die, all their charms and their attraction and the beauty, it fades away, it is mixed with the earth. But this lock of hair, since heavens have taken it up, and the muse of poetry, is evident that the lock of hair, Belinda's lock of hair, has been taken in the heavens, and it has become immortal, and it will make Belinda's name also, it will inscribe Belinda's name in the skies. Okay, this was the whole story of the poem, and it can be looked at from different perspectives. Different angles can be there from which there can be debate on the rape of the lock. The first thing that can be discussed is the rape of the lock is representative of the 18th century society. During those times, new wealth was found, and people, since they had gained that wealth easily through commerce and trade, so they loved luxury, and luxury found an easy way into the lives of people. If we look at the social and cultural life of the 18th century, the society was a luxury, they had a luxury loving life, and this newfound wealth, since it easily found its way into the society, so they did not care for it much, and there was a craze for fashion in the society, and because of it, the high class, the elite class, it was preoccupied with the trivialities, with the petty matters that are not at all important. They were often involved in the idle gossips, in backbiting, in playing cards, in the frivolities of love and sex games. So these were the chief occupations of the 18th century society. They would often involve themselves in the issues or in the activities, in the social activities that were useless, that was purposeless. Representative of the 18th century society, further if we look into it, we find that there are intrigues, and there is the act of courting. The men and women, they loved being courted. Women loved being courted, and men, they were always looking for the ways, they were always in search of the occasion to please the females, to win their hearts. They played, the ladies, the females, they played coquette. They loved artificially embellishing themselves. They used lots of makeups and ornaments, and they used very expensive and costly robes, and they enjoyed collecting valuable things. Now these, in order to make a show off, they used very expensive and costly things from all over the world, and it was this was the case with different aspects of the life. The pots that are usually used at home, they were very costly. They were made up of the china clay, which is usually quite expensive. Moreover, the makeup that they used, that was also taken, or that was imported from different parts of the world, and that they used the best and most expensive things. For example, the comb that we are told about in the poem, that was made of ivory. Now usually ivory is very expensive, so they enjoyed collecting valuable things, and in this way, the way they were leading their life, they were living a mechanical life. Usually the males and females both had affected speech and action, as we come to know in the speeches of Belinda, in the speeches of Clarissa. They had affected actions and affected speech. In the actions of Belinda, we find that all her actions, the moment she woke up in her bed till the last moment of the story, her all actions, they reflected the shallowness of the actions of the people of 18th century society. The rape of the lock is a mirror to the 18th century aristocratic society. Belinda and Baron are the representative of the 18th century elite class. If we look at their lifestyle, the very lifestyle of the people, that she gets up, instead of getting up early in the morning or offering the prayer, her lifestyle is different. She woke up at noon, and she was woken up by her pet dog, by a shock. Belinda as morning sun, then the poet represented her as the morning sun, that her eyes were so bright and shining that she could even eclipse the sun. So the ladies, they were presented as a goddess, or they were presented as so beautiful and attractive and charming, as if they were a goddess. Now from these incidents, we come to know that the integral part of the aristocratic society of the 18th century was lapdogs. There was a common fashion. Now keeping a pet dog at home is not necessary, but in those days it was an integral part of the society. Then idealistic dreams. Belinda was indulged in the idealistic dreams. She had those romantic dreams that whatever bad incident is going to occur, she would be told or she would be prophesied about that incident beforehand. The status of pets. Now later on, when after losing her lock of hair, she cries so loudly. The poet compares that those shouting and crying with a woman who has lost her husband, or with somebody who has cracked a part of the china vessel, or the death of a shark. Now three of the things have been combined together. Now from this we can see that the husband and the breaking of a pot, of an expensive pot, or the death of a pet dog, they are all equal, and Belinda cried as even harder as compared to those griefs. Now from this we can understand the triviality, we can understand the status of husbands in those times, that they are no more than pet animals, they are no more than the breaking of jars. Then fashion and artificiality of life, as we just talked about the show and pomp of the life, that they believed in artificial things, so that their lives were shallow. They were only interested in the outward pomp and show. There was an obsession for music and balls. They loved going to balls, they loved going to dance parties. Now this was an obsession. The elite class, they had only some of the leisure activities. They were not involved in any of the constructive activities. They wasted their time in idle gossips, in backbiting, in certain other things that included balls, because in those balls people would gather, they would play the music, or they would sing songs, or they will talk about other people. So backbiting, gossiping, dancing and music, these were the activities that the elite class was involved during the 18th century. And in those balls, those dance parties, the young males and females, they were involved in the intrigues against each other. The gentlemen would vie, they would compete with each other for winning the heart of a lady. The women tried to hide their true feelings from others, and they were anxious to win men, but those feelings they kept concealed in their hearts, as in the case of Belinda. The dressing table, moreover, the presentation of dressing table as a holy place, as if it is a temple, or as if it is an altar on which the people offer their prayers, offer their sacrifices. Moreover, it contained expensive and rare objects. If we once again talk about the things of beautification that were present at Belinda's dressing table, it contains combs that were made of tortoise shell, and there were combs that were made of ivory. These are the two things that are quite rare and expensive, and they are not usually available. So all those rare and expensive objects, they were part of the 18th century society, they were a part of the life of 18th century society. Then the place of Bible. From some lines we the poet used the line that patches and puffs and Bibles. So the place of Bible, it is equivalent to those puffs and powders that Belinda uses in order to beautify herself. So Bible was also placed on the dressing table with those other aids of beautification. So the Bible did not have any greater place than those ornaments for beautification. The women were involved in the art of coquetry. There was a pomp and show. Whenever they would wear a dress, a night dress, they would pretend to be sick, and in fact, in reality, they want to want to make a show off of their dress. So they would assume that feigned sickness. The women and the men, they were both ruled by trivialities. They would believe in, or they were involved, they indulged in trivial things, in petty matters. As we just discussed, husbands, lapdogs and china jars, they were all placed at the same level. None of them had greater importance as compared to the other. but there is a huge difference in the life of a person of these things if we compare it to today. Husband and lapdog, even if you don't have a lapdog at home, it would work. But in those days, lapdogs were such an important object, or they were such an integral part of the society, that the death of husband or the death of lapdog was equally mourned by females. Then the brocade or the expensive and valuable dresses are compared to the honor. They are equivalent to the honor. And the amber snuff box was another important element that was the part of 18th century society. It was a fashion, it was a tradition in those days, as Sir Plume, he carried his amber snuff box, which was a significant characteristic of his personality. On the whole, people were involved in gossip and singing and laughing and ogling. The coffee houses, they are also ridiculed. There was a tradition of going to the coffee houses and taking coffee, because the poet seems to ridicule this idea of, through history we come to know that there were thousands of coffee houses in London in those days, and people, the writers, the politicians, they used to gather in those places and they used to discuss different matters. In The Rape of the Lock, the poet seems to ridicule the idea of gathering in a coffee house. On the whole, if we look at the poem, these people who gathered at the Hampton Court, they did not have any purpose, they lacked any moral values. The Rape of the Lock can be seen as a satire on the 18th century society. The poet criticizes the social practices in the society, as we just discussed. Now, the same story can be looked at from the different perspectives. Now, it can be looked at as a satire, because initially, poet did not write it as a satirical piece of work, because initially he wanted to reconcile the two warring families who were involved in that war, in that battle. He, on the suggestion of his friend John Carlyle, he wrote this poem, which was in 1712, based on 2 cantos. So initially the purpose of the poem was to bring a reconciliation between the two families. And eventually it was said that he was successful in his purpose. The two families later on reconciled, and Pope republished this poem, The Rape of the Lock, in 1714, with the inclusion of the spirits, with the inclusion of the supernatural elements in that. And this time it was published in 5 cantos, and it later on we find that it is a satire. It represents the whole society. In the poem, the poet highlights the obsessions of the society. He pinpoints the trivialities, कि वो जो छोटे छोटे petty matters होते हैं वो किस तरीके से उनके ऊपर लड़ते हैं, उसके ऊपर झगड़ते हैं. Then he presents the comparisons of different things in order to make the readers understand the importance of different objects in their lives. He identifies the frivolities of elite class, कि किस तरीके से वो पैटी मैटर्स में इंडल्ज हुए थे, उनकी लाइफ में कोई पर्पस, कोई मॉरल वैल्यूज नहीं थी. The role of supernatural elements in the Rape of the Lock, as we just discussed, that the Rape of the Lock was meant, or it was basically written for the reconciliation of the two families. Later on, Pope thought that it can be published in the form of a mock epic also, so he included in the version that was published in 1714 for public, because the first version was not available for ordinary people. It was meant only for the two families or the close acquaintances of Pope. Only those people, they read it, and the two families, when they read that poem, they laughed at the trivialities of things, and they finally reconciled. Pope was able to bring the two families together, and the dispute was finally resolved. But when he republished the poem in 1714, he included spirits in that, and there was inclusion of good and evil, both types of spirits. In the poem, poet refers to these spirits as light militia of the lower sky. There are sylphs and gnomes. In the case of sylphs, we have the leader of sylphs is Ariel, and in the poem the poet describes through the leader that how are they transformed in the form of spirits. So that also, through this, it gives it a touch of reality, that and it highlights the obsessions of women in those times, because the women they kept vanities, they had obsessions for certain things that were trivial, that did not matter a lot in the ordinary life. Then Noms refers to the leader of Noms was Amrael, who was responsible for causing the battle that took place later on. And Amrael was responsible for creating making the condition worse, and ultimately it ended in it resulted in the form of a battle. So the inclusion of the supernatural elements, it serves an important purpose in the Rape of the Lock, because this is one of the important component of an epic poem, and by including the supernatural elements into the poem, the poet makes the poem a mock epic. Since it is said that the Rape of the Lock is a mock epic, we'll just have a review what is an epic. We discussed earlier also, because we have discussed epic poems earlier, that the Fairy Queen is considered an epic, and Paradise Lost is also considered an epic poem. Now the Rape of the Lock is considered a mock epic. It mimics the elements or the structure of an epic poem. Let's first have a look at what is an epic. Let's revise the points or the elements or the constituent parts of an epic. An epic is long narrative poem about a hero containing the following elements: the theme and invocation to the muse, battles, romance, supernatural elements, journeys, descent to the underworld, and epic similes. Now when we look at these characteristics are present in the Rape of the Lock also. If we look at the theme of the poem, yes, there is a particular purpose. The theme is there. The poet wanted to find out the reason of this dispute among the two families that has aroused these young men and women to indulge in such wars. Then an invocation to the muse. There is invocation to the muse. The poet invokes the goddess of poetry, the muse of poetry, to help him to write this. And then he says that if Belinda and Carlyle, they approve of his plan of writing this, it would give him inspiration to write this poem. Then there are battles. Since it is a mock epic, so the actions in the poem are the actions of the epic poem are mimicked in the Rape of the Lock, and the poet gives the parallel examples from classical works, also from the works of Homer and Virgil. As far as the element of romance is concerned, when Clarissa hands over the pair of scissors to Baron, he is once again compared to the classical works, and here as if during the medieval times the ladies would give arms to their knights when they would leave for the battle, for some adventure. And then the inclusion of supernatural elements, the selves and the norms, they are present in their integral part of the Rape of the Lock. Journeys, there are journeys. They travel on the boat, and that voyage through the river Thames, that is an important part of the epic poem. So the journey is also there. And then the descent to the underworld, the evil spirit Nom, it travels to the cave of the spleen to get those griefs and sorrows and sobs, those gifts for Belinda. So there is a journey to the underworld also. Epic similes. There are similes, and certain comparisons are made to the classical literature also, and at different points the poet compares the other epic poems with the actions in his poems in order to justify that this is written, the structure of the poem parodies or it models the structure of an epic poem. The Rape of the Lock as a mock epic, or we can also consider it as the Rape of the Lock as a mock heroic. It represents the fashionable 18th century society. Even if we look at the title of the poem, it is a mockery of an epic poem. the structure of the as far as the structure of the poem is concerned, as we just discussed in detail, that it contained all the elements that should be present in an epic poem, in a serious epic. Inclusion of supernatural elements, the selves, and the presence of norms and selves is the inclusion of the supernatural elements. Then the mimicry of epic actions. Throughout the poem, the poet gives different examples from the epics, from the great epics, in order to mimic those actions in his Rape of the Lock. Allusions to classical epics. There are references from classical epics in the poem, and the presentations of the characters in Rape of the Lock have been presented as if they are great heroes who are involved in battles, who are on a great task. For example, when Belinda challenges the two gentlemen, it is said that she challenges the two brave knights. So the characters are represented in such a way as they are on certain, they are ready to go into a battle. As far as the moral of the Rape of the Lock is concerned, there is no explicit moral, and some critics also believe that Rape of the Lock does not contain any moral, but we have certain instances of the moral values and in the poem, particularly Clarissa's speech. When she speaks, though her speech is affected, but it does contain certain elements of moral values. When she says that in one of the examples, she says that charm attracts sight, but merit wins the soul. Her focus of attention is that the outward beauty or the appearance, it soon dies, and this is the character, this is the quality of your moral value, your wit and intelligence that survives and that makes you immortal. So with this, we finish with the Rape of the Lock was basically written to reconcile the warring families, and he was asked, the poet Alexander Pope was asked by his friend John Carlyle to write a poem on this trivial incident in order to bring the two families closer, and he was able to bring a reconciliation in the two families. Overall, if we look at the poem, it is a presentation of the 18th century society. It is a piece of satire, it is a mock epic, and it employs the elements of an epic poem. So this was all with Rape of the Lock. Since this is the last lecture of this course, so let's have a recap of all the contents that we have studied so far. This was the course overview that we discussed in lecture 1. That in lecture 1 we discussed introduction, we discussed we had an elaborate introduction to poetry, that what is poetry or what type of a written work can be considered as poetry and how to analyze the poetry. So the basic purpose of this lecture was to introduce the genre. Then the second part consisted of from lecture 2 to lecture 7. In that we discussed the prologue to the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. Then from lecture 8 to lecture 14 we discussed the Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. In lecture 15 to 21 we discussed Paradise Lost by John Milton. In lecture 22 to 26 we discussed John Donne's love songs and holy sonnets, and finally in lecture 22 to 37 we discussed The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. Now in all these lectures, or in this whole outline, we started off from the 14th century. Geoffrey Chaucer was writing in the 14th century. Then we talked about Edmund Spenser, who was an Elizabethan writer. Then we discussed John Milton, who was a Puritan writer. Then John Donne, who was a metaphysical poet, and Alexander Pope, who was writing in the Augustan age. So we covered from 14th century. We started off with the 14th century until we covered the topics till the 18th century, and we have discussed the works of some of the most representative poets of their ages. Now Let's have a recap of these 32 lectures, that what we had discussed in these 32 lectures. In lecture 1, we started off with the introduction to poetry, that how poetry is different from any ordinary piece of writing, because the ordinary writing is known as prose, and what are the different elements that make up poetry. In this, we discussed different definitions of poetry by different poets, because different poets over the ages, they have described poetry in a different way. And this is the reason when we study different poets, we tend to analyze them from with reference to the age of that poet, because in every era their focus is on different elements. Then we discussed in lecture 1, we discussed the broad categories of poetry, that there are different categories of poetry. There is descriptive poetry, narrative poetry, and reflective poetry. Then we discussed the different types of poetry, that poetry can be written in the form of an ode or a ballad or an epic. It can be written in the form of a sonnet. So these are the different types of poetry. Then we talked about the analysis of poetry, that how to analyze a poem. First of all, we look at the rhythm and meter of the poem. We look at the rhyme scheme. So these are the apparent things, that first analyzing the rhythm, meter and rhyme scheme of the poem, then the literary aspect, that what is the theme, the subject matter of the poem, and finally we try to sort out the linguistic elements that are used in that, any use of figures of speech, and how do these figures of speech enhance the meaning, the literary meaning of the piece of text. Then in the figures of speech, we discussed a number of figures of speech. We discussed metaphor, simile, personification, litotes, and on the other hand, we discussed the figures of speech that fall into the second category, that are known as alliteration, assonance, consonant. So we discussed all these figures of speech, and later on when we discussed the text in different eras, we pointed out the use of these, because these figures of speech, they have certain effect on the poetic lines. So it was the introduction to, in lecture 1 we had the introduction to the subject. Lecture 2 to 6, in lecture 2 we started off with the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, which is written by Geoffrey Chaucer. He was a poet writing in the 14th century. We discussed the background of the age. In lecture 2, we discussed the background of the age. We talked about the introduction of 14th century. We talked about the important writers in those days and the important genres in which poetry was written. We discussed the biography of Geoffrey Chaucer, that what were the conditions in his lifetime, and when was he born, and what type of educational institutions did he attend, and his literary career also, that the places where he lived, and then his works. In the case of Geoffrey Chaucer, we discussed his literary career, that his works can be divided into 3 periods: the period of French influence, the period of Italian influence, and the period of English influence. It was during the last period, during the English influence, that he produced some of his famous works, that includes the Canterbury Tales, and in this course we discussed the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Then we discussed Chaucer's language, that Chaucer's language was different from the modern English, because when we read Chaucer, we need to consult modern English text also. But as we consult the modern English text, later on it becomes easier for the readers to understand it without the help of any supplementary text. We had an introduction to the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, that the original plan of the poem was that there were 30 pilgrims who wanted to visit the shrine of Thomas a Becket. Saint Thomas a Becket, the host of the inn suggested that in order to pass their time, they can tell 2 stories. Each pilgrim can tell 2 stories on the way going to the shrine, and 2 stories on the way home. In this way, every pilgrim is supposed to tell 4 stories. So in total it would make it, since there are 30 pilgrims, in total it would make it 120 stories. So the original plan was writing 120 stories, while Chaucer was able to finish 22 stories only, and but Chaucer was able to finish 22 stories and 2 stories are unfinished. Then in lectures 3 to 6, lecture 3, 4, 5 and 6, we analyzed the text of the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. In lecture 7 we discussed the topics for discussion, the topics that or the angles from which, or the perspectives from which the prologue to the Canterbury Tales can be analyzed. The first thing that we analyzed was that the prologue to the Canterbury Tales has a picturesque quality. Chaucer gives such vivid descriptions that the readers can actually imagine, they can form a pictorial image in their minds of the society. Then it is a satire on the contemporary society. He presents pilgrims from different stratas of the society, and it is his genius that he is able to bring the people from all the stratas of society together under one framework. Chaucer as a great storyteller, if we look at the Canterbury Tale or the plan of the poem, it is something extraordinary that person belonging to the court or the social class or the lower class, all these people are brought together. So his genius as a storyteller is marvelous. The characteristics of his poetry, then we discussed the characteristics of Chaucer's poetry. Finally, his contribution to English language, since we in the background of the age we discussed that during those times there were no notable literary works produced. So Chaucer's contribution to English language is greater, and his contribution because when he started writing in English language, and this inspiration he took from some of the Italian writers to write in his own language. In this way he contributed to English language and to the genre of poetry as well. Then in lectures 8 to 13, we started in lecture 8, we started off with the Fairy Queen, that was written by Edmund Spenser. So in lecture 8, we discussed the introduction, the background to the age, we discussed the biography of the poet. So Spenser was writing in the Elizabethan age, he was an Elizabethan poet. So we discussed the influences that led to the beginning of Renaissance in England. We discussed the important writers, and Edmund Spenser is a notable Elizabethan poet, so his Fairy Queen was included in this course. We discussed his notable works. Finally, we had an introduction to the Fairy Queen. In the Fairy Queen, Spenser mentions that his purpose of writing the Fairy Queen is to fashion a gentleman in a virtuous way, is to tell a gentleman how to live a virtuous life. The original plan of the book was to write 12 books modeled after the 12 virtues, and in each book there will be a knight who will represent, it is written in the allegorical form, and in each book the knight would go on an adventure, and it would be assigned to him by Queen Gloriana, and he would represent one of the virtue as mentioned by Aristotle in his book, and in his opposition there would be a corresponding vice also. Then in lectures 9 to 13, we analyzed the text of the Fairy Queen. In lecture 18, we discussed the topics for discussion. We discussed the invocation that he mentioned right at the beginning of the poem. This invocation, it consists of 4 stanzas only, but it is very significant because of this invocation. It gives the Fairy Queen the quality of an epic poem. Then we discussed the role what is an epic and its elements, and we discussed the Fairy Queen as an epic, whether it could be considered as an epic or not, and we discussed some of the factors that are similar in a romance and an epic, because certain critics, they consider that Fairy Queen is it lacks some of the characteristic features of an epic and it is more similar to a romance. So we can say that when we analyze these elements of the epic, we found that most of the elements of the epic are present in the Fairy Queen, but it can be considered on the basis of those claims that Fairy Queen does not contain some of the elements of the epic poem. It can be said that the Fairy Queen is a romantic epic, because there is not one hero, it is not focused on one hero, and there are a number of them, and but the rest of the elements, they are still there, so the Fairy Queen is an epic. Moreover, since Edmund Spenser was an Elizabethan writer, he was a Renaissance writer, so the elements of Renaissance are very much obvious in the Fairy Queen. We find the elements of Reformation also in his poem The Fairy Queen. Another very important perspective is that the Fairy Queen is written as an allegorical poem in which we find religious, moral, political and personal allegory. The story of the poem, it runs at two levels. One is the surface story, the apparent story, and on the other hand there is a deeper sense of the story also, in which each character and each action in the story represents a symbolic meaning. So there are two levels of the story, a surface story and a deeper message, which is the actual message of the story. Finally, the Fairy Queen has got the picturesque quality. The poet gives vivid and clear descriptions of the scenes of the characters. So the Fairy Queen has the picturesque quality also, and it is notable for its vivid descriptions. In lecture 15 to 20, we started off with Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is written by John Milton. He was a Puritan writer. In lecture 15, we discussed the background of the age and the important features of the age. We discussed this political and social background of the age. It was a period of social and political upheavals. There were a lot of changes taking place at the death of Queen Elizabeth. So this 17th century is evident of a number of social and political changes in the country. We discussed the notable writers. Among these notable writers, among the Puritans, we have John Bunyan and John Milton. Since Paradise Lost is included in this course, so we discussed his literary career also, that his literary career can be divided into three parts. The time when he started writing poems, his early poems till 1640, then from 1640 to 1660, and finally from 1660 to till his death, 1674. And it was during the last period, the third period of his literary career, that he wrote the Paradise Lost. The Paradise Lost is uncomparable in English literature, and one of the most important characteristic of this, one of the greatest achievement of Milton is the creation of the character of Satan. In lectures from 16 to 20, we analyzed the text of Paradise Lost. In lecture 21, we discussed the topics for discussion. We looked at the different perspectives, different facets from which we can discuss the Paradise Lost. We discussed the style of Paradise Lost. It is written in blank verse, and the style of the Paradise Lost is grand, that suits an epic poem. Then we discussed Paradise Lost as an epic. We discussed the epic similes in Paradise Lost. Milton uses a number of similes in Paradise Lost. We discussed all these similes in detail. Then in Milton's poetry, in Milton's Paradise Lost, we find the elements of Renaissance and elements of Reformation both. And sometimes some critics, they consider that Milton's Paradise Lost has certain defects. His poetry has certain defects, but it was proved later that there is no work in the history of English literature that can be compared to Paradise Lost. In lectures 22 to 25, we discussed metaphysical poetry. John Donne is the most representative of all these metaphysical poets. We discussed, he wrote different types of works. He wrote essays. Those were satirical essays. As far as his poetry is concerned, he wrote love songs and holy sonnets. We discussed his biography, and we discussed the elements of humanism in his writings. We discussed the elements of humanism in his poetry. In lectures 23 to 25, we discussed and analyzed the text of his love songs and holy sonnets. In lectures 26, we discussed the love songs and holy sonnets of John Donne, and these poems and these holy sonnets are representative of the metaphysical school of thought, and we highlighted, we discussed the metaphysical elements in these poems. The love songs that we discussed are Go and Catch a Falling Star, Love's Alchemy, The Rising Sun, A Valediction of Weeping. And the holy sonnets included Holy Sonnet 1, Thou Hast Made Me, Holy Sonnet 5, I Am a Little World Made Cunningly, Holy Sonnet 9, If Poisonous Minerals and If That Tree, Holy Sonnet 10, Death Be Not Proud. In all these love songs and holy sonnets, we analyze the text to highlight the characteristics of metaphysical school of thought, because metaphysical poets were famous for using the conceits, for using the far-fetched ideas. They brought their imagery from diverse disciplines, including law, science, medicine, philosophy, theology. So in the case of metaphysical poetry, emotions and imagination was replaced by logic and reasoning. In lecture 27 to 31, in lecture 27 we discussed the Rape of the Lock, which is written by Alexander Pope. So in lecture 27 we discussed the background of the neoclassical age. We discussed the characteristics of the age, because this was the time when people were more concerned with the order, with form and with the clarity. So they did not give any importance to imagination and feelings and emotions. So the literary genres that developed during this time were satires and poetry. The notable writers of this time included Dryden and Pope. They were the most notable writers of this time. Pope's age extended till 1700. He died in 1700, and with his death his age ended. Same was the case with Pope. His literary period extended till 1744, and with his death the golden era of his literary career came to an end. The Augustan age is divided respectively in these two phases, the age of Dryden and the age of Pope. We discussed the biography of Alexander Pope. Then the Rape of the Lock is included in this selection. We discussed the origin of the poem, that the poem was based on an original incident that took place between the two families because of the cutting of the lock of hair. Then we discussed the theme and the subject matter of the poem, and finally we analyzed the text of the poem. In lectures from 28 to 31, we analyzed the text of the Rape of the Lock. In lecture 32, we discussed the topics for discussion of the Rape of the Lock. The Rape of the Lock can be seen or can be analyzed as a representation of the 18th century society. The Rape of the Lock, it holds a mirror to the 18th century aristocratic society. Moreover, the Rape of the Lock can be seen as a satire on the 18th century society, because it pinpoints, it highlights the follies and vanities of the young men and women of the age. Then the role of the supernatural elements in the Rape of the Lock, because the first publication of the book in 1712 consisted of only 2 cantos, and it did not include any supernatural elements in that. It was later on that in 1714 Pope published it again with the inclusion of the supernatural elements. Probably he wanted to make it he wanted to represent it as a mock epic. The Rape of the Lock as a mock epic, it parodies the style, the structure of an epic poem, of a serious epic poem. Then we discuss the instances of the moral in the poem The Rape of the Lock. Then we discuss the instances of moral in The Rape of the Lock. It does not contain, or it does not have any clearly mentioned moral, but from different speeches, from the way the characters they talk, they make long speeches. From those we can infer different moral values. As one of the example, in Clarissa's speech, she said that charm attracts sight, but merit wins the soul. So there are certain other instances also from where we can infer the moral of the poem. And finally, in this in lecture 32, we had the review of all 32 lectures. So this was the last lecture today. Wish you best of luck. Allah Hafiz.